Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. I remember the exact moment the storm started to pick up. It was around 10:45 p.m., maybe a little later. The kind of late hour when everything feels empty and quiet, but there's an undercurrent of something strange, something eerie in the air. It had been a long day, too long, and I was just ready to get home. I work at a small family-owned bookstore on the outskirts of town, and I had stayed late to help clean up. Nothing special about the day, like just another grind. But now I was driving through the aftermath of the storm that had been brewing all afternoon. It had started off as a typical summer thunderstorm, those big, puffy clouds rolling in from the west, darkening the skies like someone flipping a switch. At first, I didn't think much of it. They came and went all the time, but this one was different. There was something about the weight of the air that felt wrong. Almost like the sky was holding its breath. It didn't help that the closer I got to home, the more isolated everything felt. The road was empty, just me in the rain, with nothing around for miles except fields of dead grass and the occasional dilapidated shack, forgotten by time. The rain started slow, just a light drizzle that barely disturbed the air, but it didn't take long before it turned into something else entirely. First, it was a steady pour, the kind that makes you squint through your windshield, wishing you had a clearer view. Then came the wind, fierce enough to make the trees bend at odd angles, their branches swaying like they were trying to claw their way out of the ground. And that was when the lightning struck. Every few minutes, a flash would light up the entire sky, and for a split second, the world around me would transform from pitch black to blinding white, as if the sun was trying to break through the clouds. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like nature was showing off its power, reminding me just how small I was in comparison. I could see the rain, heavy like sheets of glass, slashing against the road. The sound of it on my car's roof was deafening, almost like a constant barrage of bullets. As I kept driving, I noticed how quickly everything around me became swallowed by the storm. The streetlights, usually a beacon of comfort, were flickering in and out. At some points, I felt like I was driving in a world where nothing existed except for the streaks of lightning, the beating rain, and the hum of my engine. It was eerie. I couldn't help but wonder if this was what it felt like to be lost in the wilderness. The roads in this part of Texas were almost entirely desolate at night, especially when the weather turned as it had. No cars, no people, just me and the road stretching out ahead in this dark void. I wasn't scared, at least not at first. I knew this road well. It was familiar, the long empty stretch that led right to my apartment in the small town where I'd lived my entire life. But as the rain began to fall harder and the thunder cracked louder, I started to feel that nagging unease settle in my stomach. Maybe it was the isolation, maybe it was the way the wind was making my car sway a little, but I didn't have time to focus on it for too long. The drive was still far from over, and I was just trying to get home. The road ahead was slick. I could feel my tires skimming over the wet pavement, barely holding on as I fought to maintain control. I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles aching from the pressure. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, leaving only a small pool of light directly in front of me. It was like I was in some kind of tunnel, with no way of knowing what was waiting on the other side. I thought about turning on the radio, but the thought didn't last long. The static was unbearable in the storm, and it only made the silence more pronounced. It made me feel even more alone, like I was trapped in a void, cut off from the outside world. So I drove on in silence, letting the hum of the engine and the pounding rain be the only sounds that filled the air. As I neared the outskirts of town where the highway narrowed into a two-lane road, I saw the red light ahead. The light was the only thing in sight, casting a weak glow in the downpour. It wasn't until I was almost at the intersection that I saw the car behind me. My initial thought was that it was a truck or a car that had been tailing me for a while, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't tell if it was the headlights flickering, or was it more than that? At first, I brushed it off as another glitch in the storm. Maybe their headlights were faulty. But the longer I looked, the more it bothered me. There was something unnatural about the way the lights kept flashing. Not just a quick flash like a malfunctioning light, but a consistent strobe-like flicker, almost like they were trying to get my attention, or worse, like they were trying to tell me something. My gaze flickered from the rearview mirror back to the road ahead. The red light glowed faintly through the mist, offering a temporary sense of relief. I wasn't in any particular rush, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in my gut. It wasn't just the storm anymore. It was the way that car seemed to be following me. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, feeling the sweat on the back of my neck despite the cold air. The car behind me was still there, those blinking lights a constant in my peripheral vision. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, frowning. The lights were closer now, brighter and flickering in an even more erratic pattern. That's when I realized it wasn't just the storm messing with my vision. Something was off with the car. Why wasn't it moving forward like a normal car? It wasn't like the driver was trying to overtake me. It was as though they were waiting for me to do something. The light turned green. I gently pressed the accelerator and slowly began moving, hoping the car behind me would just go on ahead. But no. The flickering lights came closer, almost immediately. I could hear the sound of the engine, but it was distant, muffled by the roar of the storm. Still, it felt oppressive, like it was closing in around me. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, the headlights were right there. A soft, flashing warning, like a beacon in the storm, drawing me into something I didn't understand. For a second, I thought about speeding up, just to get away from the strange feeling gnawing at me. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just kept driving, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the flickering lights behind me. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and for the first time in a long time, I wished I was anywhere else. Then, something strange happened. I turned the wheel slightly to the left to change lanes, thinking I might get away from whatever this was. Maybe if I just moved off the main road, the car would stay behind me. But as soon as I started changing lanes, the car behind me did the exact same thing. I could see the headlights in the rearview mirror. So close, so blindingly bright. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. This wasn't just some coincidence. This wasn't just someone driving too close. I was being followed. A panic surged through my chest. I swallowed hard, my fingers tight on the steering wheel as I pushed the car forward, my foot pressing harder on the accelerator. But it didn't help. The car stayed right behind me, its headlights flashing over and over like it was trying to force me into some kind of game. I was beginning to lose control of the situation, my heart racing. What the hell was going on? My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, and my breath caught in my throat. The headlights were so close now. Too close. I could barely see the outline of the car, but I could feel the pressure, the oppressive weight of it pressing down on me. My heart pounded harder, like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The storm outside was getting worse, and the flashes of lightning made everything feel distorted, like reality was bending around me. The road ahead was slick, the kind of wet where every turn felt like I was gliding on ice. I could feel my car swaying slightly with the wind, the tires struggling to maintain any grip on the flooded road. My palms were slick with sweat as I tightened my grip on the wheel, eyes darting between the road and the mirror. My vision was clouded by the rain, the windshield wipers barely able to keep up with the onslaught. I had to squint to see anything at all, but the flashing lights, those damn lights, were impossible to ignore. I accelerated, hoping that maybe I could outrun the car. But with each second that passed, I realized I wasn't in control anymore. The car behind me wasn't just tailing me, it was matching my speed. I pressed harder on the gas, my engine roaring as the car pushed through the waterlogged road, but the headlights stayed right there. The car was locked on, like it was waiting for me to make the first move. Every time I turned my head to glance back, the lights seemed closer, flashing in my eyes with increasing aggression. Flash. Then a beat. Flash. And again, until I could barely stand it. My pulse spiked each time the light flickered, the sudden brightness blinding me for just a moment. It wasn't just annoying anymore, it was unnerving. The steady rhythm of it felt like it was on repeat, like I was being drawn into a trap, piece by piece. I had no idea who was behind the wheel, but whoever it was, they were playing with me. A sick, gut-churning feeling started to take root in my stomach. There was no rational explanation for this. This wasn't just some person driving too aggressively, it was something else, something deliberate. But why? What did they want? I thought about pulling over, maybe just stopping to let them pass, but there was a strange, primal part of me that knew I couldn't do that. The thought of letting them get any closer was terrifying. I looked ahead, my eyes scanning for anything that could give me a chance to break away. The rain was coming down so hard now that the road ahead barely existed, swallowed by the downpour and darkness. I couldn't see much farther than a few feet in front of me, and that just made it worse. The storm, the isolation, the flickering headlights, it all felt like I was in a nightmare, where the walls were closing in and there was no escape. The trees on the side of the road began to bend under the intensity of the wind. It was as if the storm was alive, pushing against my car, forcing me to drive harder, faster. My tires screeched on the wet pavement, struggling for grip. I tried to make another turn, a sharper one this time, hoping the car would lose me in the twists and turns of this stretch. But of course, the car behind me did the same. It was like we were in some sick race. Only it wasn't a race at all. It felt like a hunt. My heart was racing now, my mind going into overdrive as I tried to think of a way out. The thought of stopping for help crossed my mind briefly, but there was nothing out here. The road was empty. I hadn't passed another car in what felt like forever. There was nothing but the storm, the empty highway, and the relentless pursuit of this car behind me. No gas stations, no lights, no shelter, just the vast emptiness of the Texas countryside. And the car, that damn car. I could hear the engine behind me grow louder, as if the other driver had somehow gotten closer without me noticing. My knuckles ached from clutching the wheel so tightly. Sweat dripped down my forehead, stinging my eyes. But I didn't dare take my hands off the wheel to wipe it away. I had to stay focused. I had to stay in control. The road was narrowing. The stretches of open highway were giving way to the winding, twisting paths that led into the outskirts of town. I knew I was getting close to a gas station. Maybe, just maybe, I could make it there before the driver caught up with me. My eyes locked on the small dim light up ahead, barely visible through the downpour. It was my only chance. I pushed the pedal to the metal, the tires spinning, screeching against the wet road. I could see the gas station now, a tiny, run-down place on the side of the road. The light was flickering weakly, but it was enough to make me think it could be my escape. I needed to make it there. But just as I started to pull over toward the station, the flashing headlights behind me cut through the darkness again. Boom! Another flash of lightning lit up the entire sky, and I saw the other car's headlights glow brighter than before. This time, they weren't just flashing. They were blinding. the high beams cutting through the rain like a blade. My stomach lurched. It was like they were forcing me to stop. I quickly swerved onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled off to the side. I stopped just shy of the small parking lot in front of the station. The car behind me did the same, but it didn't stop. No, the other car moved closer. The headlights loomed like an apparition in my rearview mirror, even brighter now, blinding me. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. I had no idea what was happening, but I couldn't just sit there. I had to know who this was, what they wanted. I cracked my window just slightly, barely enough to look outside, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't do it. The storm made everything seem distant, muffled. The only thing that cut through the noise was the steady flashing of those headlights, that incessant, maddening pattern that seemed to pierce through the walls of my car like a warning. I leaned over to the side and tried to catch a glimpse of the car, my breath fogging up the glass. Then the door on the other car opened. I froze. My heart slammed into my ribs, and I could barely breathe. I didn't know what to do. My hand hovered over the gear shift, but I didn't move. The figure that stepped out of the car was just a silhouette at first, blurry through the rain and mist. They moved toward me with an unnatural urgency, almost like they were in a hurry. No, like they had something to prove. Why was this happening? They were coming closer, closer. My body went stiff with fear. I couldn't even think straight anymore. What did they want from me? I couldn't wait around to find out. I didn't even want to stick around to see their face. I took a deep breath, slamming my foot on the gas pedal with everything I had. The car lurched forward, the tires spinning against the wet road. The engine roared, a deafening noise in the storm, but I couldn't slow down. Not now. I wasn't going to stop. The stranger had taken a few steps, and I could almost feel them closing in, but they stopped. For a second, I thought they might have kept running after me, but I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The sound of the rain and the engine filled my ears as I sped away, not caring if I was going too fast, not caring about the storm. I had to get away. I didn't dare glance at the rearview mirror, but I could feel the weight of the moment stretching on. For one heartbeat, I wondered if they were still behind me. But as I pushed further down the road, away from the gas station, away from the figure in the storm, I didn't hear the car chasing me anymore. The storm roared louder, and I could only pray I'd left whatever that was behind me. My foot stayed heavy on the gas as I raced away from the gas station, my car slicing through the torrential downpour. The sound of the engine roaring in my ears drowned out everything else, and my mind spun in 1,000 directions. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and my hands were trembling so violently that I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands to stop them from shaking. The road was still slick, and I had no idea how I was managing to stay on it. Everything in my vision was a blur, a mix of rain and fog that made it feel like I was driving through the thickest, most oppressive fog I'd ever seen. I glanced at the rearview mirror once, my heart hammering in my chest. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash of headlights behind me. My stomach dropped like a stone, but as I blinked and refocused, the lights were gone. Gone. It was just me now, alone in the storm. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't out of danger. That car, whoever was driving it, had been close, far too close. The memory of those flashing headlights, the way they followed me, the way that figure had sprinted toward my car, it was all burned into my mind. It was like some kind of nightmare that I couldn't escape. But the further I drove, the more it started to feel surreal. I had put distance between myself and that person. The headlights were gone. The figure had stopped. I was safe, right? Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, the adrenaline still surging through my veins, warping reality. I kept telling myself that over and over again, as if repeating it would make it true. But then something happened. The road curved sharply to the left, and I slowed down instinctively, careful not to lose control on the slick surface. As I rounded the bend, I saw it. In the distance, just barely visible through the rain and mist, was the outline of my apartment building. I could barely make out the familiar silhouette, but it was enough to bring a rush of relief. Almost there. Just a few more minutes and I would be safe inside. I knew the area well, and the thought of parking my car and locking myself inside sounded like the perfect ending to a nightmare. I needed to get home, lock the doors, and forget about the terror I had just experienced. I kept my focus on the road ahead, trying to push the memory of the pursuer from my mind. Then, just as I was approaching the turn into the complex's parking lot, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pair of headlights flickering again. They were coming up behind me. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat. My tires skidded against the wet pavement, and I almost lost control. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think. My mind was blank, but the terror flooded back in an instant, drowning out everything else. The car was still behind me, its headlights flashing like it was trying to communicate something I didn't understand. The same aggressive, urgent flashes that had haunted me the whole time. I didn't want to stop again. I couldn't stop. I couldn't let that person, whoever they were, get any closer. My only thought was to get inside the complex, to park and lock myself in. I had to make it to the building. I had to be safe. But before I could even make the turn, the car accelerated. I could see the headlights in my rearview mirror, drawing closer and closer. The road narrowed. There was nowhere to turn, no way to escape. My pulse thudded in my ears. I swung my car to the side, pulling off the road just enough to avoid hitting the curb. My tires slid across the pavement, and I was just about to park in the empty spot near the front when I saw something that made my heart freeze. The car behind me, the one that had been following me for so long, wasn't following me anymore. It was stopped, right in front of the complex entrance. I couldn't see the driver. The rain blurred everything, and I couldn't make out any details through the water and fog. But I saw the outline of the car, parked just in front of the entrance. And for a moment, I thought maybe they were waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't hesitate. I pulled into my parking spot, heart pounding so loud in my chest that I thought it might burst through my ribs. My fingers fumbled with the keys as I quickly turned the engine off. I couldn't get out of the car fast enough. I couldn't breathe. I had to get inside. I had to lock the door. I slammed the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted toward the entrance of my building. My mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the car, the figure, the headlights. I got inside, locked the door behind me, and practically collapsed against it. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my whole body trembling from the adrenaline. The storm outside raged on, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, thudding in my chest like it was trying to break free. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that it was over, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. I picked up my phone, hands still shaking, and dialed 911. I explained what had happened, my voice trembling as I described the car, the headlights, the figure running toward me. The dispatcher was calm, reassuring even, telling me that they would someone to investigate. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When the police arrived, they did a quick sweep of the area. I didn't go with them. I couldn't. I sat inside, staring out the window, watching the rain splatter against the glass, waiting for them to come back with some sort of answer. But when they finally returned, their faces were blank. There was nothing. No sign of the car. No trace of anyone who had been following me. The road, the parking lot, everything was empty. They said they checked every inch of the area. They even drove out to the gas station, but there was no sign of the car. Nothing. I couldn't explain it. I wanted to feel relieved, but I didn't. The feeling of being watched, hunted, of something lurking just beyond the veil of the storm, didn't go away. It stayed with me that night, and every night after. I never saw that car again, never saw the person in the rain, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it's never truly over. I don't know why they followed me or what they wanted, but I'll never forget the flashing headlights. I'll never forget the cold dread that crawled up my spine every time they flickered, and the way the storm seemed to press down on me with each passing second. And every time I drive at night, through the rain or the fog or the dark, I still wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed still just a little longer? The evening had already settled into a damp, chilly haze when I found myself standing in the garage, trying to fix an old tool I hadn't used in years. The flickering light above me was the only thing breaking the darkness of the room. I had the garage door open because, despite the storm, it still felt stuffy inside. The air outside was thick with humidity, and even though the weather wasn't normally this intense in California, I had grown used to it. Or at least, I thought I had. It had been hours since the storm really kicked in, the winds picking up speed, howling through the trees. The thunder rattled the windows, almost like the house was shuddering with every crack of lightning. My hands were coated in grease from the tool I was fiddling with. It didn't help that I was already tired, but I wanted to finish this project before I turned in for the night. As I stood there, I had the distinct feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't a specific sound or movement. It was just a sense, like something was lingering in the air. The sort of thing you get when your brain is on edge, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I paused, staring at the half-repaired tool in my hands. The only sound was the wind outside, and then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible thud. I snapped my head toward the sound, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't the wind, it sounded like something or someone had bumped into something outside. I hesitated, my mind racing. Could it be a branch falling, or maybe a trash can getting knocked over by the wind? I told myself it was nothing, but then it happened again, a little louder this time. It was coming from the direction of the garage door. I wasn't one to be paranoid, but the sound felt deliberate. I got up from where I was sitting, wiped my greasy hands on my jeans, and grabbed the flashlight sitting on the workbench. The rain was coming down in sheets now, battering the garage's metal roof with a rhythmic pounding. I stood at the entrance for a moment, listening. The wind outside was making it difficult to hear anything clearly, but I swear I heard something rustling just beyond the door. The garage door was stuck, I realized, when I turned my attention to it. It was half open, about 6 inches from the ground, just wide enough for the wind to push against it and let the rain seep through the crack. I could already see puddles forming along the base of the concrete floor. That was the last thing I needed, water seeping into the garage. Without thinking too much about it, I decided I had to go outside and manually close it. The storm was getting worse, and the idea of leaving it half open felt uncomfortable. I put my jacket on, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out through the door, stepping into the storm. The wind immediately hit me with full force, pushing my jacket back as if trying to rip it off my body. The rain pelted against my face like tiny needles. I was barely able to make out the outline of the garage door in front of me. I took a few cautious steps forward, wiping rain from my eyes, and shivered as the cold soaked through my clothes. As I stood there trying to figure out how to close the door manually, I felt the unmistakable weight of dread pressing down on me. It was as though the world had gone completely silent, except for the howling wind. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My hands were shaking as I grabbed hold of the garage door handle, trying to push it down with all my strength. The wind was relentless, and for a second I thought it might rip the door out of my hands. Finally, with a loud groan, the door shifted downward, and I managed to lock it into place. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, looking around the dimly lit driveway. The night felt suffocating, like I was trapped in some twisted version of reality where everything was just too quiet. The rain was falling harder now, the ground turning into a mushy mess of wet leaves and puddles. The neighbor's house across the street seemed eerily still, dark windows staring back at me. I didn't like the feeling that gripped me, but I told myself it was just the storm, just my nerves playing tricks. I shook off the sensation and turned back toward the house. I stepped back inside the garage, closed the door behind me, and locked it. As I reached for the doorknob to go back into the house, I felt a sudden chill in the air, like someone was standing just behind me, watching me. But I was alone, or so I thought. I walked back through the door and into the house, and the warmth inside a welcome relief from the cold rain. I felt the dampness in my shoes, the coolness of the wet clothes clinging to my skin. The house creaked from the storm's weight. I stepped into the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water to try and calm my nerves. The taste of cold water was a brief distraction, but as I stood there drinking, the nagging sensation wouldn't leave. It was like something had shifted. I took a deep breath and turned back to head into the living room, but then I saw it. Wet footprints. Not the kind of wetness from me either. No. These were fresh. The wet footprints were scattered across the kitchen floor and led into the hallway, toward the living room and beyond, toward the laundry room. My breath caught in my throat. There was no way. I'd been outside. There was no one in the house when I stepped back inside. I had checked. I had locked the door. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The footprints weren't small either. They were large, wide, and unmistakably human. And they were leading somewhere, not just a random puddle. It was as if someone had walked into the house, wet from the rain, and left this trail behind them. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the trail. A sickening thought came to me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone anymore. I took a step forward, trying to shake off the panic creeping up my spine. I needed to think. Maybe I had missed something when I came inside. Maybe I hadn't closed the door properly and someone had slipped in without me noticing. But even as I tried to reason with myself, I knew deep down that wasn't the case. I carefully followed the footprints down the hallway, my breath shallow. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. The storm outside raged louder as I moved forward, but it only added to the eerie silence that enveloped the house. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet seemed unnaturally loud. The prints led me right toward the hallway, where the laundry room door stood slightly ajar. I couldn't stop myself. The door creaked as I slowly pushed it open, a low, dull sound that echoed in the silent house. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking inside. It was dark, save for the dim light from the hallway spilling through. There was nothing, just the usual dirty laundry, a dryer humming quietly. But then I saw it, a shadow. No, it wasn't just a shadow. It was a person, crouched low, trying to blend into the shadows behind a pile of clothes. My heart skipped a beat and I froze in place. For a moment, everything stopped. I couldn't think. My mind went blank. It was as if my body had disconnected from reality. The man didn't move at first. He just stared at me, his eyes wide, unblinking, as if daring me to make the first move. The air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, and my heart was thudding in my chest. I could hear nothing except the pounding of my pulse in my ears. The man shifted slightly, and I snapped out of my trance, running back down the hallway. My mind was screaming, "Get out! Get out now!" I slammed the laundry room door shut behind me and ran into my bedroom. My legs felt like jelly. I locked the door behind me and fumbled for my phone. 911. I dialed quickly, my fingers trembling as I held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a dispatcher picked up, and I rushed to explain everything. My fear, the footprints, the man hiding in my laundry room. "Stay calm, sir," the dispatcher said, their voice steady. "Help is on the way. Just stay where you are and don't make any noise." I could barely keep my voice steady. My breathing was shallow, uneven. Every small sound made my pulse spike. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. I wasn't sure if it was the storm outside or my own racing heart that made everything sound like it was vibrating. And then, the silence. I waited. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there praying the man wouldn't find me. I could hear nothing. Not the storm, not the man, just the terrible silence. Finally, I heard sirens. My heart jumped. Relief flooded me, and for the first time I allowed myself to breathe. The police arrived within minutes. I let them in, barely able to speak through the terror in my voice. They immediately went to check the house, starting with the laundry room. I was left in the living room, shaking, as the officers did their work. When they returned, one of them looked at me with a grim expression. "We found him," the officer said. "He was hiding in the laundry room, just like you said." They dragged the man out, cuffed him, and pushed him outside. He was mumbling something under his breath, but it was hard to make out. The police explained to me later that he had been hiding in my laundry room, waiting for the right moment to make his move. If I hadn't locked myself in the room and called for help, I might have walked right past him. I shuddered at the thought. The storm outside continued to rage, but all I could think about was how close I had come not making it out of that night. I wasn't alone. Someone had been in my house, watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. It was one of those miserable nights where everything seemed to go wrong. The kind of evening where you realize that it's not just the weather, but everything around you seems to be in a state of discomfort. I had been at my friend Jake's house for most of the night, trying to catch up on some homework and winding down after a long week of college classes. Jake lived a few streets away from mine in a small, sleepy neighborhood just outside of the main part of town. We weren't in a big city. Not by any stretch, but sometimes living out in the suburbs made you feel like you were a little more isolated from everything. When I finally checked the time, I couldn't believe how late it had gotten. It was already close to midnight. I quickly gathered my things and started heading home, feeling that sudden sense of dread that comes with knowing you've lost track of time. The rain had started earlier, but it wasn't anything to worry about at first. Just the usual Texas summer storm, the kind that comes on fast and leaves just as quickly. The only difference that night was the storm's intensity. It was like the heavens had just opened up and unleashed everything they had, and the temperature had dropped drastically in a matter of minutes. What was supposed to be a light drizzle quickly turned into sheets of water pouring down from the sky. As soon as I stepped outside, the cold hit me hard, making my skin crawl with that familiar chill you get right before you realize it's not just wet weather, but a full-on downpour. I tried to adjust my jacket as best as I could, pulling the hood over my head, but it didn't help much. The rain was coming down sideways, and with the wind whipping through the streets, it felt like the storm had a mind of its own. Every flash of lightning illuminated the world in stark white, casting long shadows against the sidewalks, making the night seem so much darker and more sinister. The lightning seemed to pulse in the sky like an ominous heartbeat, reminding me that this wasn't just a regular storm, it was something bigger. I made my way down the street, trying to walk quickly but cautiously so I wouldn't slip on the wet pavement. But as I walked, something was bothering me. It wasn't just the storm, though that was enough to make you uneasy. There was a certain silence that filled the air. The rain was so heavy that it drowned out the usual night sounds. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional barking of a dog, the rustling of leaves in the trees. It was as if the whole world had been muffled. I found myself glancing around, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. For a moment, it was like I could feel the entire storm closing in on me, even though I was just walking through it. I reached the end of the street where the pavement met a small patch of woods. A shortcut I always used to get home. It was the kind of route I had taken dozens of times before without thinking twice about it. Most people in the neighborhood knew about the path, though I wouldn't have called it safe. The woods were thick with tall trees and tangled underbrush, and there wasn't much light from the street lamps once you passed the last house. But it was quicker than walking around the block, and I had always felt comfortable in those woods, like they were part of the town. The only thing that made the shortcut slightly unnerving were the noises you'd hear at night. Sometimes if you stood still long enough, you could hear the distant calls of coyotes, or maybe the rustling of small animals moving through the brush. But that night, the woods were silent, eerily so. It was as though even the creatures had decided to hide out from the storm. I figured I'd make my way through quickly, hoping to get out of the rain as soon as possible. But something about the way the storm felt that night made me hesitate for just a moment. I knew it was probably nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me, imagining things because of the storm. I turned into the trail anyway, the familiar crunch of wet leaves beneath my boots, the only sound around me now. The trees overhead bent under the weight of the rain, their branches creaking and groaning in the wind. The moment I stepped off the pavement and onto the dirt path, I felt the atmosphere shift. It wasn't the woods themselves or the darkness that settled in between the trees, but the air around me. The temperature had dropped even further, and the wind howled through the branches like some sort of ancient creature calling out. The rain, though still heavy, was less of a downpour in here, but the air was thick with moisture, and the ground beneath me had turned into thick, slippery mud. I squinted against the rain, trying to see past the dim light from the street lamps that barely reached into the woods. The trail ahead seemed to fade into the blackness of the trees. I had walked this path so many times that I knew it by heart, the way it curved around a cluster of oak trees, the spot where the path dipped and narrowed just before you reached the other end where the neighborhood began again. But tonight, everything felt different. The storm, the dark trees, the endless flashes of lightning, everything felt more oppressive. That's when it started. It was that feeling, the one you get when you know you're not alone. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe it was just my nerves from the storm, or maybe it was just my imagination running wild. I was almost halfway through the woods when I felt it. A strange pressure in the air, as if something unseen was watching me from between the trees. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing behind me but the rain and the darkness. Still, the feeling didn't go away. The deeper I walked into the trail, the more it intensified. It wasn't the usual feeling of being out in nature. It felt like I was being observed. And it wasn't just in my head. I could almost feel the trees closing in around me, their twisted branches casting long, gnarled shadows in the brief moments between lightning flashes. My heart began to race, and my breath came quicker. But I tried to stay calm, to ignore it. After all, I'd walked this path countless times. I knew the way. But something was off tonight. Something was wrong. I told myself it was just the storm, the wind making the trees creak and groan, the constant flashing of lightning messing with my mind, making me see things. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. In fact, it only got worse with each step. The air was heavy, the kind of oppressive silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind that makes you feel like there's something out there, just out of sight, waiting. I kept walking, faster now, hoping that the sooner I reached the other side of the woods, the sooner I could shake this awful feeling. But the harder I tried to ignore it, the stronger it grew. I wasn't alone anymore. I was sure of it. I could feel my pulse quickening with each step, like my body knew something was wrong, even though my mind kept trying to deny it. The path ahead seemed endless, the darkness stretching farther than I remembered, and the rain was now coming down harder, drenching me from all sides. My jacket, which had been somewhat protective at first, was now just a soggy piece of cloth clinging to my skin. Every few steps, I'd trip on an uneven patch of ground, my foot sliding in the slick mud, and I'd catch myself, forcing my legs to keep moving. But with each awkward step, the pressure of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was like something was there, moving with me, in sync with my every move. I tried not to look over my shoulder. I told myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of being stuck in the woods during a torrential storm. There was no one else out here. At least that's what I told myself, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore that nagging, gut-wrenching sensation that someone was following me. Then the first real crack of thunder struck. It wasn't the usual rumble of distant thunder. This was different. It was so loud, so deep, it felt like the earth itself shook beneath my feet. I stumbled, gripping onto a nearby tree for balance as the sound vibrated through my bones. I had never felt anything like it. The storm was starting to feel unnaturally intense. Something about the thunder felt personal, as if the storm wasn't just happening around me, but to me. And that's when I saw it again. A flash of lightning split the sky, and for the briefest moment, everything was illuminated in stark white light. In that fraction of a second, I saw him, a figure standing just off the trail between the trees. He wasn't close to me, not in a way that would have been immediately threatening, but he was there. Tall, cloaked in darkness, just far enough off the path that I couldn't make out his face, but his presence was unmistakable. It was the way he stood, still unmoving, like he was waiting, watching. I froze. My heart skipped a beat and my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. I blinked hard, but in the next flash of lightning, the figure was gone. Just like that, poof, nothing, like the rain had washed him away. I told myself it was just a trick of the storm, that the rain and the lightning, the way they played with shadows, had confused my eyes. There was no one else out here. I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I wasn't alone. I started walking faster now, my feet slipping even more in the thick mud, the cold wind biting into my skin as it whipped through the trees. But no matter how fast I moved, the nagging feeling followed. The woods felt darker somehow, even though the rain and the lightning lit everything up for brief moments. It was the kind of dark that felt suffocating, like something was closing in on me from every side. I pushed on, my boots squelching in the mud, every step feeling heavier, like my body was trying to run without letting me. The sound of my breathing seemed louder now, faster, as if my body was trying to catch up with my racing heart. I needed to get out of the woods. It was just a few more minutes, just a few more twists and turns, and I'd be out. I could already see the faint light of the street lamps up ahead through the trees, but as I moved closer to the end of the trail, something changed. The footsteps started. At first, I thought I might be imagining it. I had just assumed I was hearing my own footsteps, the echoes of the rain, or even the wind playing tricks. But then it happened again, a soft, unmistakable sound. Crunch, crunch. The unmistakable sound of boots pressing against the wet leaves coming from behind me. I froze again, my body tensing as the sound grew louder. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, every step I took sending ripples of mud and water up my legs. But that sound, someone was walking behind me. I turned my head slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, but I didn't see anything. No one. Nothing. Just the rain. Just the trees. Just the storm. But the footsteps didn't stop. I could hear them clearly now, matching my pace step for step, but somehow staying just out of sight. Every time I sped up, the steps behind me sped up too. Every time I slowed down, they slowed as well. It was as if whoever was back there was mimicking my movements, following me with calculated precision. It wasn't an accident. I tried to tell myself it was just some other walker, some other lost soul in the storm trying to get home, but deep down I knew this wasn't normal. The woods were too quiet, the storm was too loud. There was no one else out here but me, except for him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Don't panic. Just keep moving. But it was hard. The footsteps were getting closer now, each crunch of the leaves echoing in my ears. My hands were trembling, my mouth dry as I fought the urge to break into a run. I didn't want to give in to panic. Not yet. I needed to stay calm. Another flash of lightning lit up the trail ahead, and in that instant, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. For a split second, I saw a dark shape just behind me, now a little closer. The lightning illuminated him for just a moment, his outline standing there, still, watching. And then, just as quickly, the light flickered out and the figure disappeared again, swallowed up by the shadows of the trees. But the footsteps were still there. They were no longer just following my pace, they were getting closer. I could hear them so clearly now, the crunch of leaves and twigs, the splashing of feet in the mud. Whoever was behind me was closing in, almost on top of me. I could feel their presence, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. I quickened my pace, but so did the steps behind me. I could no longer deny it. Someone was chasing me. My heart was pounding in my chest now, faster and harder than I could ever remember. Every breath I took felt like it was too shallow, too quick, as if my body knew what was coming before my mind had a chance to catch up. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, getting closer with each step I took. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was actively hunting me in these woods. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I felt my legs burning, my muscles aching from the adrenaline pumping through me, and yet, somehow, I couldn't stop. I didn't dare turn around. If I did, I might freeze in terror, or worse, I might give the person behind me a chance to catch up. All I knew was I had to get out of here. I had to get to safety. The trail ahead was now getting narrower, the trees pressing in from both sides, and with each thunderclap, the world felt like it was closing in on me. I tried to move faster, slipping and sliding in the mud, but the footsteps didn't stop. Whoever it was, they were right behind me now. Every crack of a twig under their boots sounded like it was right next to me, just inches away. I wasn't alone anymore. They were so close I could almost feel them. Then a sudden flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the woods for what seemed like an eternity. In that blinding white light, I saw him. He was right behind me. A man, tall, wearing dark clothing, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. His features were hard to make out, but his posture, rigid, tense, like a predator in the hunt, was unmistakable. My blood ran cold. For a moment, the whole world seemed to slow down, the lightning hanging in the air like an omen. And in that split second, I realized this wasn't just some random person caught in the storm. This wasn't just some other lost soul trying to get home. This man was following me. The moment the light flickered and the world was dark again, I heard a loud snap, a branch. Before I could even react, a hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing me by the shoulder and yanking me off the trail. The force of it made my body slam into the muddy ground, my knees scraping hard against the dirt. A sharp pain shot up my leg, but before I could make sense of what happened, I felt the cold, clammy grip of a gloved hand cover my mouth. "Don't fight," a deep, gravelly voice growled, its tone cold and rough, like it had come from a place where humanity had long been lost. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Instinct kicked in, though. Every cell in my body screamed at me to survive, to fight. My hands shot up, clawing at the arm that had me pinned, but I could barely get a grip. I kicked out with my legs, trying to free myself, but the mud made it nearly impossible to get any leverage. My stomach twisted in terror as the man's weight pressed down on me, but I didn't give up. My elbows found their target, slamming into his ribs with all the force I could muster. He grunted in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to break free. I didn't hesitate. I pushed myself up from the ground, my legs barely able to support my weight, and I ran. I didn't look back, not even once. The only thing in my head was the sound of my feet splashing through the rain-soaked earth, the sickening thud of my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't care about the pain in my legs, the sharp rocks pressing into my skin as I barreled forward. I had to escape. The trail was slipping away behind me as the woods grew denser, but up ahead, I saw it, the faint golden glow of the streetlights through the trees. I pushed harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the taste of fear sharp in my throat. I was almost there. I was almost out of the woods. I could hear him behind me again, the sound of his footsteps heavier now, closer. Every step he took seemed to shake the ground beneath me, the wet leaves squelching under his boots, getting louder and louder. He was catching up, I could hear it. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and with every ounce of energy I had left, I pushed myself forward. Just as I reached the edge of the woods, I heard him scream. It wasn't a shout or a yell, but a low, guttural sound, something that tore through the storm, sending a chill straight through my bones. But I didn't look back, not even for a second. I burst out of the trees and onto the gravel road that ran through the neighborhood. My eyes were blurry from the rain and tears, but I didn't stop. I didn't care how fast I was running, how far I was from the woods. I just had to get to safety. I didn't even notice the house I was running toward until I reached its door. An elderly couple lived there, Mr. and Mrs. Perkins. They had always been friendly to me whenever I passed by, always waving or stopping for a quick chat. I banged on the door, desperate, breathless, and almost out of my mind with panic. The rain was coming down so hard now that I could barely hear my own pounding on the door, but I didn't stop. After what felt like forever, the door creaked open. Mrs. Perkins' pale, shocked face appeared in the crack. She looked me over, my soaked clothes, my terrified expression, and without a word, she ushered me inside. "Call the police!" I managed to shout, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "Call the police now!" She didn't question me. The door slammed shut behind me, and I collapsed onto the floor, my knees buckling beneath me. My whole body was shaking, my clothes dripping with rain, and my mind racing as I tried to catch my breath. The police arrived not long after, but by then, the woods were completely empty. The storm was starting to let up, but the terror it had caused would never leave me. They searched the area for hours, combing through the woods, but there was no trace of anyone, no footprints leading anywhere, no sign of struggle, nothing. All they found were deep boot prints in the mud, leading back into the darkness of the trees. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted or why he decided to follow me that night. But I do know this. I've never walked those woods again, and I never will. And every time the storm comes back, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever see him again. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the Vault awaits your return.